Okay, so you're all very welcome. Thank you for joining me live, and thank you to those who are watching me on YouTube. So today we're looking at the whole topic of the human factor in the age of AI. I think it's a topic that's really been coming up in a lot of conversations recently. I'm seeing a lot maybe on LinkedIn and in other places, in workplaces as well, where AI is just, it's all AI talk of, and lots of investment going into AI and a big push, and a lot of pressure on leaders really to kind of try and catch up and get ahead of the game. Um, and I guess I'm here today to balance out the conversation a little bit and bring in the importance of workplace relationships and why they really matter and why we have to be careful not to let that ball drop. So that's our focus today. A little bit about my background in case you haven't met me before. I'm a chartered counselling psychologist historically, so I worked in mental health for 20 years. I've over 25 years experience now. I stopped adding up the years once I got over 25. Um, I'm an accredited coach and I work primarily nowadays with senior leaders. I coach one-to-one, and I'm the first to bring EMC, emotional connection strategy, to Ireland and Europe. So I own the first certified training centre in EMC in Europe. And that's really supporting organizations to build and maintain workplace relationships, not by focusing on content, but by focusing on the relationship, the bond, and the emotions that are happening in the workplace and giving people the skills to deal with those. So I work with all kinds of and all sizes of organizations. Some examples there. So that's a little bit about my background and what I'm bringing to this. So looking at AI, well, we're definitely in the AI wave. It's kind of whooshing over us at the moment, it would seem. And so a little bit of kind of research background. About 92% of executives expect to increase spending in AI in the next 3 years. And over half expect investment increases of at least 10%. So there's huge investment going in. There's billions of euro and dollars being put into AI at the moment in companies. It's definitely, I think in COVID, there was a big focus on well-being. And then it's like the AI wave literally kind of washed over us, and it's one wave after another at the moment. Um, Nearly half of employers globally are planning to reorient their business models to take advantage of the opportunities that AI has created. Um, excuse me. And at least about two-thirds expect to hire talent with AI skills. So there's opportunity there. I was working with young leaders over the weekend, and there's also a lot of anxiety there about AI. Scholars are wondering, well, what are we doing PhDs for here if AI is going to potentially, be doing the research and be doing our jobs in the future? So it creates a lot of unrest as well. It's probably the biggest kind of change in the workplace since possibly the Industrial Revolution. It's changing things very rapidly. So there's anxiety and there's also opportunity. Um, I guess the challenge is, with AI, that we know that, like when we look at emotional intelligence and the people factor, um, emotional intelligence scores have actually declined by approximately 5.5% since 2019. So whether that's in part due to COVID and being isolated for a few years, but there's rising stress, burnout, and loneliness as well. So alongside the rise of technology and AI, we're seeing a rise of isolation and of loneliness. So it's hard to, we can't blame AI for that, but other factors would include the maybe more isolation with hybrid working or 100% remote working, as in some organizations. And there's a lot of stress because of the constant volatility and change that's happening. The other thing is that with the rise of And the same thing happened when computers kind of came into the workplace first. It What can often be promised to us is that, oh, they're going to do some of the work and we're going to be able to have more time off and a better work-life balance. But what tends to happen is that because computers can work so quickly, and we're expected to be able to keep up and work almost like machines. And I've been reading lately about 12-hour workdays becoming commonplace, and 6-day weeks becoming commonplace instead of the 4-day week, which is, there's a lot of research behind that and a lot of trials going on in companies. The counterpart is that there are workplaces now increasing it to 6-day weeks and 12-hour days, which sounds crazy coming from a mental health background, because we know what the impact of that is. So when we look at employees, almost 60% of employees report intentionally using AI tools at work to a very large extent. So there's a large adaptation of AI in the workplace and among the self-employed too. But the same report flags that the loss of human interaction and connection is a commonly experienced negative outcome of AI use. So that's a really important thing that we need to hold in awareness. AI is here and it's here to stay and it's only going to grow. But I think at this point we need to really bring in our conscious awareness and look at, okay, what do we have to be careful about? What do we need to be aware of? What do we need to make sure about? And so while AI adoption is high, the relation or connection side, the human side, is already being felt as being under strain. And that there's little warning signs going off here, which I suppose I'm here to kind of alert and bring our consciousness to, before it gets too late or before there are a lot of knock-on effects. So amongst the tech surge, that's big AI wave, something is slipping, and that something is in relation to relationships, the connection, the trust, the safety that happens with human relationships. So we've got a couple of people joining us there. Thank you so much for coming in. You're very welcome. So emotional intelligence, then, when we look at it, contributes massively to job performance, about 58% of job performance, and 90% of our top performers possess high levels of emotional intelligence. And that's something that robots can't replicate. So I think there's opportunity here, because even as the AI wave kind of comes and takes over and washes over us, and there's the huge fear of AI taking over so many jobs and doing so much, what makes us uniquely human is the emotions that we experience. And yet, as human beings, we don't often have great tools or skills around emotions, and particularly in the workplace. For a long time, the myth was that emotions don't belong in the workplace, that there's no place for emotions in the workplace. And yet we know that for high performance, we need people to be in high energy, high positive emotions. So, for example, motivation is a positive emotion. So that's an emotion we want in the workplace. What also can detract from performance are if we're experiencing a lot of negative emotions or preponderance of negative emotions. That brings our performance down. So performance and emotions have a very strong link. And so emotions are happening in the workplace all the time. And yet we don't have the skills to address the difficult emotions that happen in the workplace. And when there's a lack of awareness and we don't have the skills, then they tend to impact on the relationships and on the atmosphere that's happening in the workplace, whether that's a remote workplace or in-house workplace. So AI and tech can automate lots of things, and there's lots of jobs that they're going to do, but human relationships still matter. And I think there's opportunity here for leaders. And if we want to look at, well, how do we future-proof leadership? How do we future-proof our jobs? Then I think we're going to have to get even better at the emotional and uniquely human factors. So managers with high emotional intelligence tend to retain 70% of their employees for 5 years or more. And we know that employees who have leaders with high IQ, they tend to feel more inspired. So the research is showing that emotional intelligence matters. For years back in like from about at least 2017 onwards, every year when Forbes would do the top 20 characteristics needed by leaders for the year ahead, emotional intelligence kept coming up in the top 10. And so it's been up there and it's been recognized as a skill that's needed. The research backs that up. And yet, on the ground, I'm still not seeing leaders being promoted for their emotional intelligence and people skills. And now with the push of AI, the money is going into AI rather than the people development. And what's often happening currently in workplaces is that, particularly maybe middle management, people are being promoted into management roles and not being given any training, any people training, and that puts that leader under huge strain, but the whole team can then struggle and suffer. So there's a huge knock-on effect of that. So absolutely, the investment needs to continue in AI. But what I would argue is that it's equally important that we don't drop the ball on emotional intelligence and on people skills, and investing in our people. So we know that for engagement and retention, the emotional intelligence of leaders and managers really counts. And yet, a very recent article in Forbes highlights that the very dominance of AI in the workplace could actually diminish our emotional intelligence. So we have stats showing that emotional intelligence is already going down and that the advance of AI is impacting, and we're seeing our emotional intelligence being diminished unless we deliberately act now to preserve it and continue to develop that. So I think it's still hugely important that we invest in our leaders, our management, our emotional intelligence skills. So this is one kind of set of stats that I think can be really helpful for people, just a nice kind of visual to understand the importance of the relationship as a critical driver of job satisfaction globally. And this is McKinsey & Co. 2020. So when we look at the drivers of life satisfaction, job satisfaction contributes to just about 25% of that. So it's a big factor, but it's not the biggest factor. Mental health is a more important factor in life satisfaction, and there are other variables that add up to the remaining 39%. But when we break that 25% job satisfaction down and we look at the drivers of job satisfaction, the biggest single factor of job satisfaction is interpersonal relationships. So almost 40%. So let me explain that. The relationships that you have with your colleagues and with your manager are more important, contribute in a bigger way to your job satisfaction than your paycheck, than how interesting the job is, than your promotional prospects or career ladder. So it's a bigger factor than anything else. And we know this anecdotally. People will stay in, you know, a crappy enough job if they love the people that they're working with. They can stay years if they feel happy with the people. And the inverse is also true, that we could have a great job on paper. And when we go in there, if we cannot connect with our manager, our colleagues, then we're not going to last. So when we break down that 39% driver of job satisfaction, 86% of that is the relationship that we have with management. So that manager direct report relationship is absolutely critical to our job satisfaction. And that also impacts on our performance and our engagement levels and, obviously retention. Okay, so the relationship is absolutely critical. And we know that relationships across the board, like I've worked, as I mentioned, over 25 years in psychology at this stage. I've worked with, I didn't count them up ever, but hundreds, if not thousands of people, both one to one and then in groups. And the more I work in these fields, the more I see that relationships are everything through our personal life. They impact our long-term happiness. They impact our mental health and our well-being. They impact our ability to stay in a job, our job satisfaction, our performance. So our relationships and the bonds that we build with other people around us, particularly in the workplace, the people that we depend on. So we depend on our manager, as you can see with the 86% there, and we depend on close colleagues with whom we need to collaborate. So our team, those relationships are just massively important to our well-being, our life, and our performance. So when we look from the kind of employee perspective, again, 2025 survey showed that 61% of employees believe that investing in AI tools would boost their productivity and their motivation and engagement far more than traditional perks, like maybe having a pool table or your free drinks in the little kitchen down the hall or whatever it might be. So staff believe that tools matter, and so it's absolutely important, but that doesn't mean that the relation or connection factor can vanish. They're still hugely part of the engagement story. So going forward, we have the AI, juggernaut, but we also need that human connection side, with the people skills, and investing in that, because that's a critical factor to so many things. When we look at relationships, again, like 75% of survey participants, and that's the Harvard Business Review, that was back in 2018, indicated that the most stressful aspect of their job was the relationship with their immediate boss. So again, that emphasis on the relationship, and particularly that manager direct report relationship. We also know that when people leave a job, about 70% of the time, it's because of that difficult relationship with their boss. So in a climate where there is often, maybe particularly in the younger generations, they won't stay in a job now. They won't put up with it if they don't have that good relationship, and if their emotional needs are not being met. And that's probably more of a challenge than ever for managers who are often managing remote teams or hybrid teams, because it cannot just be, you know. Uh, performance related interaction. There has to be relationship related interaction. So there has to be more of a conscious effort made and more time put into and invested in. So giving bosses at any level, giving managers and leaders that time to invest in their team, to build those relationships. And if you want to get the best out of your team, then that's a really critical thing to do, because we know that, massive research, but by Google, even that, the single most important factor in, like, if we look at the top performing teams around the world, is that psychological safety, that safety that you feel when you have that good relationship in the workplace. So I'm here today to tell you a little bit about a particular approach, and called EMC, emotional connection. That's what EMC stands for. So EMC is a structured, science-based process that helps people reconnect emotionally so that they can work together better. It's a step-by-step method. It's a very streamlined process, that we can train anybody to use, and it helps you to get underneath the surface to the real drivers of behavior. And so that helps you to transform negative patterns into collaboration, trust, and engagement. So it's a tool that has been developed and researched by US psychologist Dr. Lola Gershfeld and her team. And I'm the first certified training center in Europe So, in practical terms, what EMC offers is it gives leaders and teams a clear roadmap to talk about the real stuff. Um, it strengthens psychological safety, which we know to be the key driver in performance in teams, and it strengthens trust. It gives people really a language. So it takes a little bit of time to learn a new language. It always feels funny and awkward when we're practicing a language for the first time, or trying out your French accent, for example. Um, but once people have this language, if a team has this language, for example, then that just creates a solid ground underneath them, a layer of safety and trust, which actually means that they then can just get on with the work much easier. Um, it turns difficult conversations into constructive ones, and it restores relationships. So, where there have been breakdowns or disconnections in relationships, it gives you the tools to repair those relationships and rebuild that bond and that trust so that performance then follows. So, again, we know that when relationships feel safe and when we feel connected, then our performance, we're free basically to bring our authentic self to work. We feel better, we feel safe, and then we can get on with the work. So just looking at emotional intelligence and how that maps with emotional connection, the roadmap that we teach in EMC brings you through that structured process that build self-awareness. So you're building emotional intelligence tools. You're building self-awareness because we're in the process helping people to recognize their own emotions. We're giving people the skills to name emotions, which we often don't have. We're not having to pick emotions out of the air. It's done in a very safe way because there's such a structure. It's literally like a checklist. And I'll show you actually the process that we teach people. And you're bringing people down through it like that, and that process then, because you're not having to think about, oh my goodness, what am I going to say next, what I'm going to do next. You're following the process that actually can bring people deeper, and it's very safe. So there's none of that kind of unease about emotions, even though we're in the workplace. So you're building self-awareness, you're helping people to understand what's going on for them, how they're being triggered, what kind of raw spots somebody else may be touching off. They're learning how to manage and self-regulate over time, and also through this process you're de-escalating the difficult emotions that might be happening. They're identifying fears, they're identifying, so we take the very much the focus away from, oh, you said this and I didn't like that. It's not about blame. We take the focus away from any finger pointing or blame or scapegoating. And what we do is we help people to recognize that what's happening is a negative cycle is happening between us in that relational space between us. So, for example, if I had a disconnection happening with one of you and you were my manager, then it's about kind of recognizing I've been triggered and there's a negative cycle happening between us. Can we take a look at this and slow down and maybe use this process to resolve it? So you're building that kind of social awareness and relationship management. So in the one process, you're giving people a lot of emotional intelligence tools, which is one of the values, the big values that I see in this process as a psychologist who's worked with leaders and emotional intelligence measures, such as the EQI 2.0, for example. That's the one I'm certified in. I have never before come across a process that then helps you to build emotional intelligence. So very often there are a lot of very, very well researched and well-founded measures for EQ out there, but there haven't been, well, now this is what to do and how to build it. There hasn't been a structured process to use before now. So this gives you that roadmap. So just helping you a little bit to understand the psychology about why relationships matter, even in the age of AI, or maybe in particularly in the age that we're coming into now. If we go back to attachment theory, and EMC is based on attachment theory and also neuroscience and other systems theory, for example. But just to give you an understanding of attachment theory and its relevance here, attachment theory is a psychological concept. It was developed by John Bowlby in the 1950s and 60s. Marie Ainsworth would have been another researcher. And it really describes the bond, the emotional bond between two people. So our first attachment figure is our primary caregiver. So if we go back to the 1950s, 1960s, that was usually the mom in a family. So when a baby comes into the world, their primary attachment figure, which would have been definitely the mom in those days, it could be either parent or caregiver today. That baby is so dependent when they come into the world. They're totally dependent. And so that attachment bond that they form with that caregiver is hugely, their survival depends on that, on their ability to attach. And Bowlby believed that the earliest bonds formed by children have a long-lasting impact. So in other words, that's like the template that we have for future relationships throughout our lives. And they demonstrated that nurturance and responsiveness are the primary determinants of attachment. So without going into what kind of attachment style you have, we don't need to know that, but just for your own understanding, the type of attachment bond that we experience in that primary attachment as a baby shapes our experience of the world. So, if, for example, our primary caregiver is responsive to us and nurtures us and changes a nappy when we cry and feeds us when we're hungry and kind of anticipates our needs, then as a baby we learn that the world is a safe place and my needs are going to be met. So we grow up trusting in the world and we grow up trusting our needs to be met, and that template then carries through into future relationships, including relationships in the workplace. Whereas if we have a parent or a primary caregiver who, not necessarily through any fault of their own, cannot respond to us. Maybe they're going through severe depression. Maybe they've just had a bereavement. Maybe they have a mental illness or an addiction issue, or for whatever it might be. And so, for example, they don't respond to us, or they have kind of unpredictable response patterns. So sometimes we're picked up and nurtured, and other times we're left to cry it out for hours on end, or maybe left in, a wet nappy for hours, or not being fed when we need to be fed. Then we learn that the world is maybe unpredictable or unsafe. And so there's a distrust that develops, and that impacts on our behavior, and that changes and shapes our template for future relationships. So attachment theory has, you possibly, if you're, I don't know if you're ever on, Instagram or Facebook, but you'll often see people now using attachment theory to help you to understand your relationships that are happening in your adult world, because it often tracks right back to that primary one and our early experiences. So at work, to apply this attachment theory to work, we know that we are social creatures who cannot thrive in isolation. So as human beings, we are wired for connection. And that goes back to like early man, where we were tribal creatures. And if you were rejected or excluded by your tribe, that meant certain death. Think of the animal kingdoms now. If an animal is rejected, they're not going to survive for long without their tribe. And we're very much the same, and that part of the brain is still with us. So there is that primal need to be connected, and it doesn't matter if you consider yourself to be a total introvert. You still need that sense of belonging. It's a human need, and that sense of connection. So, the biggest resource for us as human beings is emotional connection with other people, especially those who we depend on. So, we depend on our manager and we depend on our close colleagues in our team. Anybody we have to collaborate with, there's a dependence relationship there. So, we know that when we work together, we actually impact on each other physiologically. For example, our heart rate, our breathing, but not just physiologically, but also even emotionally. And that can still happen over Zoom or Teams. If you think about, it's like, oh no, I've got a meeting with Mr. Smith today, and immediately your heart rate is being changed before Mr. Smith even comes online to you. So we do impact each other in unconscious ways, both physiologically and emotionally. So those relationships are really important to us and to our well-being. And when we cannot find a safe way of connecting, we end up moving into negative patterns and negative patterns of communication. And that is counterproductive because it takes us further away from where we want to be. Because if I'm feeling unsafe, or if I'm reading something from your facial expression or a tone of voice, for example, I'm getting triggered, then that's impacting on my behavior. Then that in turn is possibly triggering you. And now we're both on guard a little bit, and we go away feeling maybe disconnected and not as trusting of each other. And that impacts on our next interaction, or the email that I send you will have a different tone. And so it has this whole kind of knock-on effect. Whereas when we can connect and feel safe, then we become much more effective and stronger in our performance and in our relationships. So I hope this is making sense. If any of you, I know some of you have joined live, so feel free to pop questions into chat and I will come to them towards the end. So one of the tools that we teach people in EMC, Emotional Connection Approach, is about A or E, based on the attachment model. Are you there for me? And so that's a basic attachment question that is, in a way, it's there in every worker's mind about their leader, about their manager. Are you there for me? And that question, or the answer to that question, determines really the, whether there's safety there or not. So if I'm thinking of, the person that I report into, and are they there for me? That's a critical question. If I feel that, if I can answer that as a resounding yes, they are there for me, then I have a secure attachment and I feel safe at work and I can bring myself and perform. And that brings us then into higher potential. If, however, I'm asking that question and it's like, I'm not sure, or it's a maybe, or it's a definite no, then you have an insecure attachment relationship with your manager. And that means that you're not feeling safe, you're not feeling connected, there's going to be disengagement. And that's where, if that is allowed to continue and fester, then what happens is you have somebody often looking for a way out and looking for alternative employment. So I just see a question coming in here on that. Let me just check. See. Oh, that's okay. Somebody just had to pop off at that point. Yeah, sorry. Let me actually, so can I just check? Have you lost the screen share there? Are you seeing just me, or are you seeing the slides?
You see you now. The slides were there.
Slides were there.
Yeah.
Slides are gone. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Just double checking.
Yeah, they're there.
Perfect. So as a tool, AORE then is, AORE stands for accessible, responsive, and engaged. So as a leader or as a manager, you need to know, you need to be accessible, responsive, engaged for your people, for your team. So accessible means exactly what it sounds like. Can I reach you? Are you open conversations even when you're stressed? can you be there for me? Responsive means, can I rely on you to respond to me when I call? Can you tune into my emotions and show that my emotions are important to you? And this is a really big one because the focus often in management is maybe more transactional and can be like task oriented and target oriented. And yet, what people actually need is their manager or their leader to slow down and emotionally connect. And that is hugely underrated in the workplace. Very often we're in task mode, as I would call it. And so it's about, okay, you bring in a problem, let's find the solution. And yet we know that if there's any kind of emotional triggering going on for a person, then we need to slow down and acknowledge the emotions so they feel really heard with where they are. And only then are they ready to go into the solution. So if we go into the solution and the fix it too quickly, then a person might come away, and it's quite likely to come away, still feeling unheard and maybe underappreciated. Yeah, problem solved theoretically. I know what to do, but that's often not where the real problem is. So we have to be careful not to just jump into fix it mode, of which often we can do that very well because it's safe. And it's like, right, there's your problem, there's a solution, off you go. And there's been no emotional connection, and the person is still miffed or disconnected. So leaders need to be trained and have the skills to tune in emotionally to where their team or their staff member is at. And then engaged. Can you be emotionally engaged even if you don't agree with me? So, can you engage with me even if if part of you is kind of going, yeah, I don't agree with what you're experiencing, or but can you still engage with me and be emotionally present, so that the needs are being met, the emotional needs are being met, even if you're coming from different angles. So it's really important that leaders are learn how to be accessible, responsive, and engaged. And that then is based on the code of attachment and helps teams to be emotionally responsive in their work relationships, which in time creates trust, that collaboration and engagement. That when we feel like our manager or our leader, the person we report into, is really there for us, then we can thrive. Then it's like they've got my back. And also in these times when there's so much volatility and a leader has to ask their team, I need you to trust me on this. This decision is for the best. Well, just asking for that trust doesn't work. It will only work if you have been accessible, responsive, and engaged. If you've been there for your team, if you've built up those relationships, then you have that safety in the bank and they can trust you. Telling them you can trust me, folks, is not going to work. That's not how trust works. It's not enough to say, yeah, you can trust me. They have to know that experientially. And so your team are going to be much more easily on board with you in those times of uncertainty and change in an organization if you've built up that trust and safety with them, if you've shown them that you care, that you can emotionally connect with them, that you're there for them. So, in conclusion, really, healthy employee relationships are what leads to productive, profitable companies, even through, and maybe especially through, times of unpredictability, as we are experiencing in so many organizations, where that kind of the outside world impinging on us, between the Trump tariffs and war and conflict and AI, all of these kind of world changes that are happening create a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability. But if we know that the people I depend on work are there for me, they care, they get me, I can connect with them, then that creates a much more solid foundation for a person to be able to get through. And so that's the bedrock then for the organization. It's about creating a whole culture of safety, and then you can cruise through all those kind of icebergs that are happening in the rocky waters. So just to maybe give you kind of like a little insight into that process, that roadmap process that EMC offers, We help people to identify the negative cycle that is happening when there's a disconnect between two people in a relationship. We help, so you can see here, if we might have Tom and Mary, for example, we put Tom on the left and Mary on the right. We help them to identify, Tom might say, I got triggered when Mary's voice, her tone of voice changed, or there was a certain look on her face, and that triggered me and made me kind of stand back, I was kind of waiting for bad news then. And my raw spots were, and we have a list of 16 raw spots that people can kind of identify where they've been hit off. So raw spots really are the hurts that we carry from prior relationships and experiences throughout life that people can hit off very easily. They don't get time to, those wounds that don't get time to heal often. And so because we bring our past into our current situation, we help people to identify the emotions that they're experiencing, and we do that by helping them to identify, again, on lists, what three layers of emotions are. So there are surface emotions, what's happening on the surface that I can identify and that you can probably see, my frustration, my irritation, for example. But also we go then into the more vulnerable emotions. And when somebody can identify and tune in with their more vulnerable emotions, it gives them insight into what's really going on for them. But it's actually, when done in a safe way with the other person, that can help people bond, because they're now not just at each other from that kind of surface emotion level, but they're allowing themselves to be more vulnerable together. And I know, you're probably aware that Brené Brown, for example, has done huge work on the importance and relevance of vulnerability in the workplace, that those vulnerable emotions allow us to begin to bond. We help people to recognize what's going on in the body, their fears, what's going on cognitively, their automatic thoughts. So when we're triggered, when we're in a negative cycle with somebody, there's a whole lot of things firing off at once. We have thoughts that come to mind, we slip into behaviors, we have protective behaviors. So often the person who might be behaving badly on your team is feeling disconnected. That is how we would frame that's their protective behavior, because they're not feeling safe, they're feeling disconnected. So they go into, and we help you to recognize the different styles of protective behavior. So for some people, that's about withdrawing. I'm protecting myself. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to avoid and go to distance. I'm not going to be talking to you for a while. And for others, it's more demand. It might be criticism. It might be judgment. So if you're seeing that in the workplace, that's what we call a pursuer. They're actually reaching out for connection, but inadvertently pushing people away with their behavior. And so that's triggering the other person. So in this case, Tom is triggering Mary. Mary's getting triggered. Her reactions and her protective behaviors are re-triggering then for Tom, and it goes around in that negative cycle. And so what we're helping people to do is to recognize what's going on in the negative cycle, to build their awareness. So I become aware of how I'm being triggered in the workplace, but also how I might be triggering others. And we help then to have bonding conversations so that they move into a positive cycle where they start to create safety for each other by tuning into my own experience and sharing, hearing yours, validating your experience, reassuring, meeting each other's emotional needs, and then you're creating safety for each other, and more aware then, so that you're not re-triggering each other. But now if you do re-trigger each other, you have the emotional skills to deal with the situation and mend that and repair that and heal that, so that you can bond again, so that the same hurts aren't happening, and the same, not poking at each other, which is what normally happens. Of course, all of this is applicable to your personal relationships as well. There's huge learning in it. And, I think if everybody had these skills, then that would hugely reduce the conflict that we're experiencing in the world. So I think these skills can make a massive difference, because it's kind of like the last frontier, really. Our emotions are that area that we're just have avoided for so long, that we don't have the skills, and we avoid conflict. We don't know how to repair once conflict has happened. And of course, conflict is happening all the time in the workplace. It's estimated that the average worker spends 4.3 hours per person per week. So the average employee is spending 4.3 hours per week dealing with conflict. Managers and leaders are probably spending more time, but that's it averaged across everybody. So if you've only 10 people in your team, that's already one full-time job, like 43 hours a week going on on conflict in the workplace. So it's a huge cost and it's a huge stressor for people. And when people come to me for one-to-one coaching, leaders and senior leaders, it's a very common theme. It actually takes up a lot of time for people in coaching. Is this 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 conflict or this disagreement or this disconnection is stressing me out. I'm losing sleep. I don't know what to do about it, and so it's a huge cost for people. It's a huge drain on energy. So we've talked about the influence of AI. We've talked about, that kind of wave and the investment that's being put into AI in workplaces and currently in organizations, and the counterbalance, the importance of still investing in your people, and the science behind that, why it's important, why relationships matter. So if you care about relationships and want your people you want to develop your leaders, for example, then some of the benefits of this approach are that you can have the skills to resolve workplace conflict and increase productivity. So your bottom line is impacted. You create a psychologically safe environment. We know that that increases team effectiveness and is the uh, single biggest factor in a high team performance. You now would have tools to address anger, stonewalling, passive aggressive behavior, lack of trust, and those kind of difficult behaviors that you can see happening in the workplace frequently. You've got a tool to repair relationships and increase emotional connection. So you can build agile teams that can evolve and change. They can ride through the rocky waters more easily. And you're developing an atmosphere and really building a culture that supports coaching, collaboration, and commitment with each other. So I want to tell you, I suppose, the two ways that if you have an interest in learning more about EMC or training in it, if you are interested in training a team, for example, what's currently happening is I'm being brought in to train senior leadership teams in an organization, often as the kind of first stop, and then that spreads to other teams within the organization. But it often starts at the top. So if you're interested in workplace training, then just get in touch with me. We can have a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever suits, just a conversation so you can find out what that might look like for your company. If you're here as an individual and you're kind of like, I think I might be interested in this for myself so that I can work with people, then I have a masterclass certification happening in February. And there's SkillNet funding available for all of this training, depending on your eligibility. So, and also depending on the particular SkillNet having availability at the time that you're applying. But when that happens, it's 35%, so it's a huge saving. So it's a masterclass certification. It's a professional training that's recognised by the International Coaching Federation and the Psychological Society of Ireland and a lot of the bigger HR bodies in the US, for example. The training is done over 2 or 3 days in person, ideally 3 days. It doesn't cost any more. And so this training will be on the 12th and 13th of February, and we'll have limited numbers. So again, if you're interested, just get in touch. Just want to let you know about that it is available and have you keep it in mind. But there's lots of places that you can get free resources to learn a little bit more about this approach. Dr. Gershfeld has 4 books. This is one of them, probably the good place to start. Her book, Emotional Connection. Their website, emcleaders.com, has lots of information, resources, infographics, white papers, the whole lot, case studies. So there's loads there. I haven't tried to replicate that. There's enough on the parent website, but there's, I'm the person for outside of the US currently. So if you are outside of the US, get in contact with me. And my website is nevehannon.com. I'm going to pop my Calendly into chat in case you'd just like to set up a call. And here you have, if you haven't already, my QR codes where you can join my monthly newsletter. I promise not to bombard you, or if you're not already, connect to me on LinkedIn. So you quite possibly are if you're watching this, but if not, do connect. So I'm going to stop sharing that and I'm going to check in with those of you who are here live in case you have any questions. If you're watching this on YouTube later, then feel free to get in touch with me by email or message me on LinkedIn with any questions that you might have, or to set up a call with me and so we can meet.